To the point.
We're going to zip forward, fast forward, past Christmas, past Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, all of that kind of stuff. We're going to go right to New Year's Eve, and then we're going to go back again and review the past year. So we're going to go over the news stories of the past year. What was most interesting to us? What news stories most affected us over the past year? We're going to do it with a good panel. Audrey Gusky is here. Dr. Gusky is at the University of at Duquesne University. She's professor of marketing, and she's our go-to person for marketing information, retail sales, all that kind of stuff. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks, PJ.
And State Legislator Mike Diven is here from the, I forgot the district, the 22nd District, which covers the south part of the city and some of the South Hills.
Yes, sir.
And you are a Republican now.
Yes, sir.
You are one of the news stories that we're going to be talking about this year. And Rich Fitzgerald is here, District 11 of Allegheny County Council, and he covers Squirrel Hill, Shady Side, all the way down to the waterfront over
Part
into
of the Mon Valley, yes.
Okay.
South side, that area over there.
Okay. Mike's a Republican. Rich is a Democrat.
Republican?
You're Republican.
Yes,
Oh, my goodness.
I'm outnumbered here, PJ. I got my work cut off.
I'm not going to tell you what I am. Well, let me ask you first, Audrey. What news story most affected you or most interested you over the past year?
Well, as someone who studies consumer trends for the past 20 years, I thought the huge story this year was the fact that Federated bought out the May Company, which as a result suggests that Kaufmanns are all going to turn into Macy's.
Right.
And, you know, I grew up with the Kaufmanns, Gimbels, and Horns.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we're losing all of our department stores and they're all consolidating into one store we're now going to call Macy's is a huge deal. We're losing Kaufmanns, the Kaufmanns clock, the TikTok restaurant, all the traditions. And
the clock will be there, but it won't be the Kaufmanns clock.
Well, we'll still call it the Kaufmanns Club,
Yeah.
PJ, but I think that was a huge, huge story because it's suggesting the whole retail picture, the landscape of all of the downtown area as well as the suburbs is changing and changing dramatically.
And it raises a couple of questions. The first one is Kaufmanns really going to remain? Is the building going to be a department store 5-10 years from now? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think it will. Obviously, they're the only game in town other than Saks being downtown. And so I think we need a department store presence. And I think Federated would be very foolish to pull out. And so at least for 5 or 10 years, I'm predicting they'll still stay there.
What about the other retail scenes downtown? Everybody's been talking about development along Fifth Avenue and Forbes Avenue. What is the future of retail downtown, do you think?
Well, if you backtrack and look at what happened in the past, we lost Lord & Taylor's, we lost Lazarus. And so unfortunately, the picture doesn't look very rosy or very merry because none of the huge department stores have been able to maintain a presence there. So the future, we're hoping to bring somebody else in. The beauty would be Nordstrom's or a Neiman Marcus or a nice upscale store. That's probably not going to happen in the short run.
What was the one they were talking about the other day in Chicago? Creighton something?
Possibly, yeah. And we were also talking about a Bloomingdale's, I think, for a while coming in, and none of that has materialized. But, you know, the downtown arena, you need something. You need some downtown presence as far as a major department store. If you look nationally at the trends, the department stores are not doing well. So it's not just the greater Pittsburgh area, but it's really nationally. So I'm hoping that we'll keep the Macy's, we'll keep the name, we'll keep a department store, and maybe bring someone else in.
So you don't think that downtown development is spending good money after bad? You think that downtown, done right, will attract shoppers?
Well, you've got so many people working downtown, and you know everything is cyclical. In the past, probably about 2 generations ago, that's where people shopped in the downtown area. We're bringing some more people living into the city. We're bringing more residential areas. We're bringing more restaurants and more entertainment and fun into the area, and so hopefully the stores will follow as well.
Mike, let me ask you, what's your what big story affected you the most?
I tell you one, just on a national level, I think one of the major stories for this year had to be Hurricane Katrina. I think it was, you know, one of those stories that you'll be able to remember for a long time to come. And just seeing the nightly and almost hourly reports on the cable news channels, and you know, having to comprehend that this was happening in America, which was, you know, I think a shock to a great many people. So it was a natural disaster that, you know, I think was probably, in my opinion, one of the bigger news stories of the year.
And for us who weren't directly involved, it was an emotional news story because we hear the Americans living in third world or worse conditions after the hurricane.
I mean, when they're referring to American citizens as refugees, you know, that's a term that normally you wouldn't put in the same sentence. And having that play out and really not having for a week or two a sense of whether or not they were going to get things right and get them back on track was it was a really interesting and emotional thing to watch unfold on television. So I think for me that was probably the most profound news that I got to witness this year.
And you're in Harrisburg. You're in charge in a way of state government.
Yes.
Does this bring to mind concerns that something like that might happen in here?
I think that all along, even post September 11th, I think that we always go through and we try and want to make sure that we're as safe as possible. But I think that excuse me,
I forgot to turn his cell phone off.
I apologize.
What's the music? I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take a short break. Rich,
Okay.
we don't care what you think.
I want to know who that phone call's from.
We're going to get back to Mikey and Rich in just a moment. Short
on
break.
night talk.
Don't go away.
Called them on TV.
We're pretending it's New Year's Eve, looking back on the past year, the news stories that affect us most, talking about that with a number of people, including Rich Fitzgerald, member of Pittsburgh of Allegheny County Council, District 11. And let me ask you, what over the past year happened that affects you most, you find most interesting?
Well, I agree with Michael. I think the Katrina events just changed how I think we all looked at what America was. I think maybe some of us were kind of shocked into knowing that there are people that live in conditions like that, and that our government was so impotent and able to handle it and able to deal with it. And I think you're seeing these political ramifications fall a lot. I don't think the Bush administration has recovered, nor do I think they will recover. I think it has really been the event that has just put them down below where they can effectively govern, and I think it's put them in a tough spot. Locally, I have to say that the row office thing, I mean, we've almost forgotten about it, but we had 200 years of a prothonotary, a clerk of courts, a register of wills, and the voters eliminated that early this year. So at the local level in county government, we're going to have big changes moving forward the way the government has never run before.
And even the county controller, though, says that that's not going to be the kind of a change that's going to realize a lot of money in savings. And we still have the sheriff, we still have the treasurer, and what's the other one? There's one of the district attorney that are going to remain elected, and there should be more consolidation, according to some people. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that it's going to result in a lot of savings, because you still have to do the functions. You still have to record the deeds, do all of the functions that these offices do. But it's just a change in the political culture of the way Allegheny County has run over the past generation. So I think that'll be more the change than the fact that we're going to see this huge savings of money. I don't know what other consolidations we can do. You have to kind of wait 5 years to let it kind of sink in and settle out, and we'll see. I think it's between the county and the city consolidations that are possibly going on. There's just a change going on, and it's kind of exciting times, but in some ways it's scary times too.
One of the big stories of the past year is Mike changing his party affiliation. He grew up in a city neighborhood, came from Democratic family, his family has been working for a long time with people in the Democratic Party, and you changed to a Republican back in January.
Well, I still have a lot of Democratic friends and supporters. I will tell you this, it was obviously a tough decision. I went through a lot of thought in doing this, but it was a decision that was actually made for me by the Democratic leadership, both locally here in Allegheny County as well as in Harrisburg. One of the things that I always tried to do as a Democrat was to open the process. In fact, I brought a lawsuit against the Allegheny County Democratic Committee to open the ballot process in endorsing candidates for office, because I think that a lot of times those deals were cut in back rooms, and not necessarily were we putting the best candidates forth. Well, I introduced a lawsuit, and there was an extreme backlash. In fact, in 2004, I lost the endorsement not once but twice, even though I was an incumbent who had a pretty good track record. And then, I had the Democratic leaders in Harrisburg, because I stood up for Ralph Kaiser and Dave Marinick, two Allegheny County legislators who were redistricted out despite winning overwhelming in their districts, because they just didn't go along with what Bill DeWeese and Mike Vion wanted them to do. They also came in and spent about $150,000 in a primary to beat me, which was unprecedented for the Democratic leadership in Harrisburg to come into a Democrat's primary and sink that much money and that much effort. I think the final straw came in January before I made the decision to switch parties. My district staff in my district office, who were responsible for taking care of about 600 to 1,000 constituent calls or complaints or walk-ins in our district office, that staff that is employed through the Democratic caucus were terminated. They received letters firing them, and it was a situation where I had to make the decision, not about politics, but on how to best serve the constituents and the communities I represent. So it was a tough decision, but ultimately I think it was a good decision. I think that one of the upsides is in Harrisburg, both the House and the Senate are controlled by the Republican caucuses, and having the ability to play a role in the majority caucus has given me more of an opportunity to get legislation passed through, to get assistance, and to get support. In fact, this year was the first time we hosted a senior expo, because I'd never gotten the support out of Harrisburg to host a senior expo, and we were able to service about 700 or 800 senior citizens. We get about 400 flu vaccines. So, I mean, these are the kind of quality of life things that I wasn't able to do.
On the other hand, you do hear stories about the Republican leadership in Harrisburg cracking the whip, making sure everybody's in line, and those stories came out of the legislative pay raise issue. Now, if you upset the Republicans, then what?
Well, I can tell you that I would say that obviously there's legislative positions leadership takes, but in my case, I was one of the people that stood up and voted against the pay increase. I refused to take the unvouchered expenses, and I was a co-sponsor on the repeal, which ultimately passed, which gave back the pay raise that was given. So I didn't receive any backlash. In fact, they have pretty much given me the support and the resources and the ability to vote what I believe is right. I mean, I talk to people. I'm still the same person. I still believe in the same thing. Pro-labor. I'm somebody that believes in working family issues, but I've always been pro-life. I've always been a hunter and a gun owner, and I've always been considered a fiscal conservative. And it's interesting, if you look at Allegheny County and you compare the Democrats from Allegheny County to southeastern Pennsylvania, the Republicans, you'll find that the Republicans in southeastern Pennsylvania are much more liberal than the Democrats in Allegheny County, with the exception of maybe somebody like a Dan Franco and a Jim Furlow. Pretty much most of your Democratic elected officials are pro-life, pro-gun, hunter, sportsman's rights.
But even the guys you mentioned are conservative on local issues, or maybe not conservative.
But, I mean, all the wedge issues that you compare in parties. I think politics has changed a great deal in the past 20 or 30 years. Now I think it's the individual candidate. At a time you needed a party to get your message out and get elected. Today you have the ability to use direct mail, cable television, internet, all these tools to get your message and your platform out, so you make a personal connection with the voters. I mean, you look at somebody like Tom Ridge. He was a pro-choice Republican. That's that wouldn't have happened 20 or 30 years ago. You look at Dan Honorado. In many cases, he's probably much more conservative than Jim Roddy was.
We have to take a short break. We're going to be right back. We're reviewing the news stories of the past year. Short break, and we'll be back. Stand by. We're not celebrating the new year yet. We're reflecting on the old year, the news stories that are most important to us, that have some sort of an emotional tie, perhaps. We have a great panel tonight. Let's talk about slots legislation. We've been talking about slots for a couple of years. Finally, it's legal, but the licenses haven't been granted yet, and it really hasn't happened. From your perspective, Dr. Gusky, what is that going to draw people in to the state, to the region? Is it going to be good for retail? What are the effects, the economic effects, do you think, of slots when it finally happens?
Well, PJ, I'm not sure it's going to draw people into the area, but it's going to keep people from going outside the area. So instead of going to West Virginia or Atlantic City or Las Vegas, a lot of the Pennsylvania gambling money will stay here. My concern is what happens to the citizens here. You've got a lot of issues such as, gambling problems that people may have, and some of it maybe the crime that comes along with it. In a lot of cities, St. Louis being one of them, when they brought gambling and legalized it, they had a lot of social issues. So that's one of my biggest concerns. And where are they going to put it, and how are they going to manage it? And there's a lot of issues.
Are there enough people spending money on slots in southwestern Pennsylvania to raise the kind of revenue that state officials are talking about.
I think they'll be raising some of the money. I don't think it's going to be as high as they're actually predicting. That's very, very optimistic.
What do you think, Mike?
I agree. I think that originally the numbers were very inflated. I think that it's something like it was like $1,600 per person in Pennsylvania would have to lose, playing slots in order to get the numbers that they expected. But you have to remember the reason why they inflated those numbers was because they were tying the revenue to property tax relief, which has been a mess. I was one of the people, I voted for gaming, even though I'm not a fan of gambling. I think that it can be regressive, and I think it can be predatory at times. In order for the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County to move forward, there was a great deal of benefits in supporting this legislation, and it's going to bring, I think, an estimated $30 million a year in revenue to the city and to the county, so that we can be in a position where we don't have to lay off police officers. Or
do you think that's going to happen?
I think they'll get a significant revenue bump, but I don't know if it's going to get to the $1 billion worth of property tax relief that they've touted. And they're saying that relief won't come for another 2 years. I was one of the people that voted against Act 72 because I believe that we got it wrong in the gaming legislation. I've been a supporter of legislation that we just had the opportunity to have a vote on in the House, and I spoke on this week, which is the Stop Taxing Our Properties legislation, which seeks to eliminate property tax on residential homesteads. And I think that we haven't done a clear job at delineating who we're trying to help. I think if we just wiped out all property tax, it would do a great disservice to school districts. But I think that the people we're trying to help are those people that own their home, that are struggling to make sure that they're staying in their home, and then they're seeing reassessments come year after year and doubling or tripling their property tax bill. And I think that we need to focus in on property tax relief that helps that segment of the population. In the urban areas, it's the homestead property owners. In the rural areas, it's the farmstead property owners. Give them the break that they need so that they can maintain their possession and be in a position where they can continue to see the first-rate schools and everything
We'll
else.
talk about property taxes in a minute, but let me ask you, Rich, about slots, specifically in the city of Pittsburgh. Is it going to be bad for the city, good for the city? Is it going to raise the kind of revenue we're talking about?
Well, first of all, it's an open question as to whether it's going to be good or bad. I'm sure some people, they're going to like it, and they're going to benefit from it, and there are going to be people that are going to be hurt by it. It's going to be a mixed bag. The revenues, I don't know. We have to look and see what kind of money is brought in. It's amazing to me the capacity of some people to go out and gamble and spend a lot of money. We see it. If you go to Chester, West Virginia and drive along, Route 2 there, Route 7, you just see so many Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh plates. It's amazing. We do cry out for property tax relief. Having been in county council for the last 6 years, I've lived with this issue of reassessment after reassessment. Under the leadership of Dan Onorado, we finally put in a base year plan, which is going to kind of stabilize what we've been trying to do. But the second component of that really does have to come out of Harrisburg. And I think you've had the House and the Senate there have not been able to come to agreement. Democrats and Republicans haven't been able to come to agreement. But we need property tax relief badly, particularly for seniors in this area who just can't afford those huge increases. And it comes back to school tax. It's not their county tax, and it, in many cases, is not their municipal tax, but it's the school tax that we have to find a way to get help for. Will gaming help some of that? I'm hopeful, but we'll have to see how those revenues come in.
Well, both of you raise some interesting issues. Slots is tied to property tax reform. If we don't raise the money that they're talking about through slots, any property tax reform that depends on that is not going to work, right?
That's how they sold it.
Yeah, they bundled the two to get the softer areas in favor of legalizing casino gambling. But
is it a shell game? Is it a scam?
I believe in many aspects it is. But I can tell you that this week I just got back from Harrisburg last night. I'll be going back Monday. The other night we were on the floor until after 1:30 in the morning. We discussed 17 different proposals that deal with property tax relief. And I've always said that property tax reform is kind of like world peace. Everybody wants it, but then when you start to talk about how you're going to attain it, everybody pulls out their calculator and does, how's it going to impact me? What we have to do, aside from the gaming revenue, whether that's real or not, we have to figure out a way to shift that tax burden.
Let's talk about that in a second. When we come back, that's one of the big stories of the past year. There's no question about it. Efforts to reform property taxes that go to schools. We're going to do that next. Stay where you are. We're reviewing the big stories of the past year, and one of the biggest in the state is efforts at property tax reform, the property taxes that go towards schools. We'll talk about what's going on in Harrisburg, but Audrey, first of all, let me ask you what might be happening here in Pittsburgh with property tax reform. Is there some sort of a retail component to that? Would property tax reform free up more money for consumer spending? How does it affect the economy?
Oh, absolutely, PJ. When you really look at, people have limited money. And if you look at the landscape of the Pittsburgh area demographically, we're an older population. So with a lot of senior citizens and a lot of people who are retired, they are on a fixed income. So if they only have so much money and a lot of the money is going to their property taxes, they're not spending it elsewhere. So I think that's a huge issue for us. And so we need to take a look at that and just put more money in the hands of consumers so that they'll in turn be spending money, discretionary money, on different things that they're looking for.
On the other hand, some of the proposals they're talking about in Harrisburg would raise the sales tax and would raise perhaps income or wage taxes locally and even statewide. Is that borrowing from Peter to pay Paul?
That could very well be. If you look at the spending habits, though, I think people would prefer to spend it on sales tax versus property tax because it gives you the options and you're buying what you're really wanting to buy.
So, Mike, do you want to predict what's going to happen in Harrisburg? What's it going to look like?
I would like to see something. We're going to be back in next week. There's talk that we could be in as late as Friday evening, which is rough, especially because I haven't started my Christmas shopping yet.
Well, you have a good excuse.
Yeah.
Hurry up.
But I think that there is definitely a sense of urgency to get something done. Unfortunately, what I'm fearful of is that we're going to end up, there's a proposal in the Senate which kind of punts the ball by calling for a referendum in May, which I don't think gives us the ability to address, the property tax issue. I think that, I've worked very hard. I've come up with a couple different proposals, not only on the property tax side, but also on the spending side. I came up with a resolution that was ultimately approved by the Legislative Budget and Finance that said if we can consolidate the school health care budget spending, we could save $863 million. So, I mean, that's...
What's so difficult about doing that, consolidating?
Well, there's 501 school districts, and they all go out and they all negotiate. How I came up with the idea was I looked at the state. The state has 110,000 employees and retirees in their system in the Employee Benefits Trust Fund. So we're self-insured. We're able to spread the risk out over a greater pool. Well, when you have 501 school districts and you've got smaller pools, you've got to pay stopgap insurance, or you've got to pay somebody else to assume your risk.
What I meant was, considering the savings, and I think everybody agrees that there are huge savings when you consolidate, why would it be so difficult, even though there are a lot of school districts bringing them all together to do that?
I completely agree with you. In fact, there's a lot of upsides to it. One, it gives you predictability in the future. It helps, contain the cost growth. But more importantly, the number one cause of school district strikes in the state of Pennsylvania is disputes over health care benefits. So if we were able to, guarantee that our teachers and the professionals that work in our school districts, weren't going to be left without health care, and they were going to have good quality health care, and we were able to protect that by spreading that risk out over a 211,000 employee pool, we would be in a position where we can get a lot accomplished. But unfortunately, ideas have a very slow way of getting to the point. Yes, and it's very frustrating. But I think that it's something that we're starting to see the momentum. I mean, look at property tax. We're sitting here talking about property tax and the urgency in Harrisburg and in Allegheny County. You have to remember, this is an idea that started 30 years ago. Governor Casey, proposed almost the identical same thing that the Senate is talking about, in the 80s. So, we're in a situation where, government by design is supposed to move at a slow pace. And a lot of times that's frustrating to people like me and Rich who have to work in that confine, but it's even more frustrating to, the constituents who want to be able to call us and have their problem solved within a week. And, unfortunately, it doesn't respond that fast.
Let me ask Rich.
We have to get to the cost part of it. I mean, we're talking about property tax and shifting it to wage tax. Until we deal with the cost structure of public education, that's really the problem.
School boards are spending too much money, is what you're saying?
501 school districts might be part of the problem. I mean, that's a lot of superintendents, a lot of, as Michael said, different individual bargaining units for health care and for a whole host of other things. We need to get to a point where the money goes into the classroom. Too much of the money goes into administration, into some of these things like health care. We need some real leadership at this level. We've seen at the county level, again, Dan Honorado ran into a deficit, he laid off 500 people. That was one of the hardest things he had to do, but it brought fiscal sanity.
Well, people are worried about local control. They're going to lose whatever voice they have in the school's affairs. Same with municipalities. You've got mayors, council people, police chiefs. They don't want to give up what authority they have in these small municipalities, so they don't want consolidation.
Some of them do, I think, PJ, but sometimes it's the local elected officials that don't want to give up the local.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Not so much the citizens per se.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's both. You know, the citizens, they want to make sure they have some input.
If they see the dollars though, and they see what the cost would be, you know, who cares who paves your street as long as it gets paved? As long as you can call somebody, whether it be your state representative, your city councilman, your municipal mayor, whoever it is, as long as the services are done in an efficient manner.
We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be right back. We're talking about the great stories of the past year. Stay where you are. We're reviewing the big stories of 2005, pretending it's New Year's Eve, and we have a great panel to do it. Let's talk about new leaders in the city of Pittsburgh. Bob OConnor is going to be the new mayor. Mark Roosevelt is the new superintendent of schools in the city of Pittsburgh. Audrey, you're a marketing expert, so you don't deal directly with these problems, but one of the problems the city of Pittsburgh and even Allegheny County has in drawing people, keeping people here, is school system, the local economics, and so forth. Are you optimistic about what's happening with this new leadership I described?
I am optimistic. I think we need a change, and it's a good thing. And the fact that B.J. Leber is coming in, the mayor just announced that she will be helping out, and she's done some wonderful things, great marketing background, and I think that's a positive thing. So I think we've got a lot to look forward to as far as the future in Pittsburgh.
Okay, let me ask the two politicians here.
I can say that, you know, having had a number of meetings with Mark Roosevelt, I'm thoroughly impressed with the man. I think that he really has a great grasp on improving education, but he also has a great grasp on the impact to the whole community and the importance of it fitting into the rest of the city government. He's made, you know, some really great strides. I think that, you know, most people don't realize this, but, you know, the city of Pittsburgh School District is about $500 million in spending. It's more than the city of Pittsburgh's government. And, you know, for too long we didn't have somebody in there that understood that we've got to be cost effective, and we also got to provide excellence in education. And I think that Mark Roosevelt, and everything that I've seen him so far, has really been, you know, the right person for that job. And I think that, you know, if we're going to move our region forward and we're going to draw more young families back into the city, you know, the number one thing we can do is bring, you know, somebody like Mark Roosevelt in, who's going to make that a priority and do it in an efficient economy that's going to make, you know, taxpayer friendly, but at the same time produce the kind of graduates that people want to send their kids to public schools in the city.
One of the things that seems amazing to me is that racial politics is most visible, it seems, in this town on the school board in educating our kids. And he seems to be overcoming that. And it's really too early to say because he's only been around for some months.
Well, I think there's been a lot of leadership there, PJ, with Bill Eisler, the president of the school board. Deserves a lot of that credit for being a guy that can a conciliator to bring different factions together. And I think under Bill's leadership, the board has really moved forward in that regard. As Michael said, the city's budget, school budget's about $560 million, which is incredible. Mark has come in. I think he's put a plan on the table. They've needed to cut schools for years. They realize now, Dan Honorado has said to Allegheny County residents, we are not going to let assessments go up anymore, in which school boards had taken windfall after windfall. That gravy train has ended, if you want to call it that, where school districts now know they're either going to have to raise millage, which is not a politically feasible thing that they want to do, or start to make some of these hard cuts.
But I think, you know, he's right. You know, President Eisler and Mark Roosevelt, I think that they understand that aside from the political side, you know, there is, you know, an ability here to really have a profound and dramatic impact on changing the culture on how Belfield Avenue works. They've come in here. I mean, you look at some of the reports just a few years ago. I don't know if these statistics statistics are accurate today, but they're probably in the same ballpark. You know, the statewide average administrative cost per pupil is $700. In the city of Pittsburgh, it was $1,200. And we should be below the statewide average because we're the second largest school district, and we have the ability to spread that administrative cost out over more pupils. So, you know, there has been, you know, an unwillingness in the Belfield Avenue building to address that, as we've seen the population of the schools go from 75,000 down to 35 or 36,000 students. We haven't seen the corresponding cutbacks in the administrative stuff, and that, you know, right there is probably $20 or $30 million worth of spending that is pretty questionable. So I think with you know, Bill Eisler and Mark Roosevelt there, I'm very excited for the future of the city of Pittsburgh schools, and I think you've got some pretty good board members as well.
Okay, are we?
Bob O'Connor too.
Yeah,
we kind of fluffed over that one.
Are we? No, we didn't fluff over. No, we have to take a short break, and we're going to be back.
I'm excited about it.
Okay, well, we have one excited. We'll see if the rest of us are excited.
I like Bob. He's a great guy.
Short break. We're going to be right back. Stay where you are. Been talking about new leadership in the city. Mark Roosevelt, the new superintendent of Pittsburgh City Schools. Now let's talk about Bob O'Connor, the new mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, or will be shortly, a few weeks from now. Are we as excited about Bob O'Connor as we are about Mark Roosevelt? What do you think?
Well, I think it's new life to the city of Pittsburgh, which is fabulous. We're looking for a new renaissance. We need to change. We need to shift things. You know, Murphy did some things, but of course, when I look at the retail picture, nothing really worked. It didn't seem like, you know, all the plans and the actions.
Well, he really couldn't get anything going. Couldn't get that downtown development.
For a lot of reasons, yeah. And so I'm hoping that we get more residential people living here, upgrade the school system so that way in the downtown area, city schools will be better, and maybe bring some new families and some new energy.
Well, Bob O'Connor says he wants to make a big splash at some point in Harrisburg. What do you think?
Well, I think he's, you know, he's Bob. He makes a big splash. He goes into a deli, he makes a big splash.
Yeah, he does.
So
he's a good guy. He's a good mayor.
He's very personable. But before I talk about Bob, I will say that I think that, you know, history has a way of judging people differently the further you get away from it. And I will say that, you know, I've actually had people in the past do campaign mailers against me because of my working relationship with Tom Murphy. All in all, you know, Tom Murphy was faced with a dire financial consequence that wasn't his creation. It happened over 30 or 40 years, and I think he managed the best he could. And I think that there are some really great things that Tom Murphy has accomplished. I mean, obviously, you know, the South Side Works, the Washington's Landing, the Convention Center, the new stadiums, the stuff that's happened in the Strip District. You know, we have, you know, some significant investment in our town. You know, the riverfront trails. You know, 15 years ago, you know, you didn't have people rollerblading down Second Avenue. You know, you have these. You have these.
A lot of people said, and I think most people agree, Tom Murphy had great vision. He had some great ideas. The problem, according to the legend,
I got in trouble. I made the statement. I made the statement in the paper, and some of his people said, "Yeah, you shouldn't have said that." I said his problem was he grew up an only child, and he didn't have brothers and sisters to beat the crap out of him growing up. So he never knew how to compromise. And I think that
he couldn't get along with people.
Well, he has kind of like an artist vision. You know how these directors that they sell their movie to network TV and then complain that they don't like their content cut out to fit the time allotted. So, you know, he had that same thing that he wrestled with. He saw this big picture of what Pittsburgh would be, and he worked very hard to get there. Unfortunately, I think there was a lot of things outside his control. I mean, we were in a situation where we saw a great deal of, I mean, look, 40 cents out of every tax dollar that comes into the city of Pittsburgh goes to pension liabilities and to debt service. We have the single highest per capita debt in any municipality in the country. And that didn't happen because of Tom Murphy. That happened from years of, you know, exodus from the city to the suburbs and us not addressing it. And now we have to deal with it, and we don't have the political wherewithal because the majority of the legislators, both Republican and Democrat, don't live in the city anymore. They live outside of the city, and they don't, you know.
Well, let me ask Rich about Bob O'Connor. Are you confident, excited about
I am excited about Bob because I think he does have the political skill to work with a different type of people. Suburban legislators, city council, the county council. He has a good relationship with Dan Honorato, and I think it'll be helpful. Having said all of that, Bob's challenges are immense with that budget.
Yeah.
That budget is almost unmanageable for anybody, not Tom Murphy, not Bob O'Connor, not Davy Lawrence. The debt load and the pension load are just, they're almost crushing. So they're going to continue to need help. And that's going to be a huge challenge. As Michael said, you know, you've got people now that have moved out of the city. The structure has just changed, the tax structure. Yeah. The city's a great place to live. Oakland is a great place.
I agree.
Downtown, you know, has it, but the people that come to Oakland don't pay taxes. You know, that's, and the property in Oakland is all tax exempt. So while a lot of what's happened in the city has been great, the structure of taxing and collecting revenue and paying the bills kind of hasn't kept up. So until that occurs, and that is controlled by Harrisburg, not by anything Bob O'Connor or Tom Murphy or Dan Honorato can do, and we need to change some of that.
Well, one of the things, you look at the city of Pittsburgh, I think 37% of its property, its land mass, is tax exempt. And that's, you know, one of our biggest engines for reoccurring annual revenue. In addition to that, we've got 15 to 20,000 tax delinquent, blighted, and abandoned properties that are off the tax rolls that are, you know, we're costing us $3 to $5 million a year to send crews out to either board up or tear down or, you know, kill rats or pick up garbage. These are killing it's an urban cancer, and it's not unique to Pittsburgh. I actually have a bill that I got passed out of the House, and I've got a commitment it's going to get run in the Senate, which would provide $50 million in a state board that would allow us to go in, because what's happening here is people want to develop in the city, but you have a property that might be really worth $2,000 or $3,000 that's got $40,000 worth of liens.
Right.
Nobody's going to spend $40,000 to purchase that property, to invest in it. So we need to go in and clear those liens off, get the infrastructure, the sewer and water and the streets, you know, attractive, bring people in, have them invest in that property, and put the property back on the tax rolls, and then from the future property tax revenue that's created, that money comes back to a fund, you know, in the amount that the state has invested. I have a piece of legislation that I've worked very hard on, actually with Tom Murphy and with some people in Philadelphia, and you know, we think that we can get that to the governor's desk, and it can make a tremendous impact. Another issue that I think that we've got to address in the city, the county, and the school district is the employee population has shrunk enormously over the past 100 years, but the building infrastructure, the maintenance and operation cost is enormous. We actually worked to do a study with some people that were facility management people, and they showed us how, based on the number of employees and the square footage in 12 buildings, I think we have 1.2 million square foot of building space. We only need 300 and some thousand to accommodate the administrative offices for the city, the county, and the school district. You know, my thought is, why don't we consolidate them in the 5th and Forbes corridor, do underground parking, do 4 floors of retail, and put the city and the county and the school district offices in one central location, and use that as a loss leader to drag people in to go shopping in that retail corridor, because one of the sparks.
But then what do you do with all the other space that's opened up?
I think you go back and you convert them into residential space. You could put 1,000 residential units downtown by converting the Robbins building or the county office.
So you really do believe that if you build, residents will want to live downtown?
I think if you look at any other urban area, Philadelphia, Rittenhouse Square, I mean, there's example after example. You know, for years the national trend was you make a little money, you move to the suburbs. Now all these people have moved to the suburbs, have become so overpopulated that they've got to spend 2 hours on the Parkway to get back into town. They look at the uniqueness of city living, and you know, they'll move back, but it's, you know, almost like Field of Dreams. You've got to build it first for them to come. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff that Bob has really got to tackle, and I think Bob, you know, if he surrounds himself with the kind of people that I think he's capable of surrounding himself with, he's going to be in a position to really, you know, I mean, crisis is opportunity, and I think that he's got a real opportunity here.
Okay, well, we're talking about the big stories of 2005. We're going to continue in just a moment. Don't move. Reviewing the big stories of 2005, let's talk sports. One of the big news items of 2005 was the need on the part of the Penguins for a new arena. They say they can't survive in Pittsburgh unless they have the revenue that comes with a new arena. The Civic Arena has been here since, what, 1961 or 1962, the oldest arena in the NHL. Now Dan Honorado says, we're going to get you an arena. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do it, says Dan. Slots revenue, some private investment of one sort or another, but they'll need at least $300 million. Do you think, Audrey, that can happen? And number one, and number two, if you build it, will they come?
Well, if you look back and you take PNC Park, which is fabulous, one of the best parks in the whole country, and you take Heinz Field, and people argued about that, and do we need this? I remember Forbes Field, and I loved that, and I hated when they built Three Rivers, but yet progress, and people are looking for new and exciting. And I think to keep the Pens here, I think we need to do something like that.
Well, PNC is a great ballpark. I think everybody agrees with that. We all love the Pirates. We like baseball, but the Pirates aren't doing very well. They're not making a whole lot of money.
Well, the Pens aren't doing that well either.
And the Pens, we'll talk about them in a moment, but can you justify the expense for these new stadiums?
Well, hopefully it can, and we've talked about the gambling, and maybe that's going to have some kind of effect upon it as well. But I think to keep the Pens here as a major metropolitan area, you need to have huge sports teams. Pittsburgh is sports, and I think we need to do anything to keep them here.
Can we get them an arena? What do you think, gentlemen?
Well, I think it's going to be a challenge, and I know Dan Honorado has said he's working very hard to do that. And I know new Mayor O'Connor, Mayor-elect O'Connor, is going to try and do so as well. But I think also the Penguins have got to step up with some private money to just come up with their hand out and say, we want $300 million. I mean, we're basically a county of about 1 million people. That's about $300 per person. So every person's got to send $300 to Mario Lemieux to help him build his. Now, we're making decisions. We've cut pools in the city of Pittsburgh. We're cutting school. We're closing schools. We're closing senior centers. We have property taxes that need relief. Are people going to be willing to want to spend the money to build a new arena? If you remember when the ballparks were built, there was a huge fallout.
Oh, sure.
Dunn, Cramner, DeWitt pushed it.
We had a referendum.
Dunn, Cramner, DeWitt were eliminated at the next election because the ire of the taxpayers. Tom Murphy came within an eyelash of also falling under that as well. It's, we want to help the Penguins, but the taxpayers are not crazy about funding things that do not really bring economic growth into a region.
Well, if Mario and the Penguins get a slots license, the theory is that they'll have that source of revenue to build a new arena.
I think that that's a big if, depending on they ever get the slot licenses out. But one of the things that the difference, I agree with Rich. Obviously we're in a much tougher financial time. When we built those two stadiums in the convention center, we were in the biggest growth in the peacetime economy in the United States history. There was huge surpluses at the state level, and they had the resources to invest in that. Today there's a different financial climate, and that's why I think there's two things that we're blessed in. One is the potential of them having a slots license, and the other thing is that an arena is inherently different than a baseball stadium or a football stadium. With a baseball stadium, you can only use it for baseball and a concert here and there. A football stadium, the same thing. An arena, you can use upwards to 250, 270 days a year. So you have the opportunity to bring a lot of other revenue streams into an arena than you would a baseball stadium or a football stadium. So I think that, I've got my fingers crossed, and I hope that they're successful in their bid for a slots parlor. And I think that at that point, hopefully, we can find the resources to do some of the infrastructure. But as for going out and building a new arena, I'm not optimistic, because I think that the governor said the other day we've got $90 million to invest in Allegheny County. If you want to take that $90 million and put it in there and not do any of the other infrastructure projects or
what other projects are we talking about? If we spend it on an arena, what's going to suffer as a result?
We talk about cleaning up brownfields to try to redevelop riverfronts.
You're talking about roads and bridge projects. You're talking about a major amount of investment that can
So where should the money go? Infrastructure.
Well, that's a public conversation that we're going to have, and I think Michael's right. With all the events, you can have wrestling and concerts. It could be structured in a way that the revenue stream from those other events could be used to maybe service the bond. pay the debt service on the bond. If we're creative and if we can do it, that's fine.
Yeah.
We just to take taxpayer money and dump it in the arena, though, I think it's going to be a non-starter. We've got to be creative in how we do it.
I think that if they're able to come up with a package that works, you will see some state money and some local money that will come in for things that are not directly within the facility or the building itself. You would see infrastructure, parking garages, access roads and things of that nature that, are soft costs that, are included in the development. So I believe that it's going to be tough, but I think that the uniqueness of an arena as opposed to a football stadium or baseball stadium gives us, a lot of hope.
Well, the Penguins just aren't going according to the plan. The plan was we get a salary cap, we get salaries under control, we change the rules to make the game more exciting, we bring in Sidney Crosby, we get some good free agents.
Win some games.
And win some games. But wait a second, that last part isn't...
I've always said that I would like to see a class action suit where, you can have major league franchises, when they have
we only have a
salary
couple
cap-
of seconds.
Yeah, well, I think that they should be paying for the stadiums themselves. They get all this. They get billions of dollars in TV revenue. Why not set $2 or $3 billion